I think there was merit to quitting, and the fact that it was a TikTok phenomenon and it was like, got viral and all that stuff. When they first saw that, it was like, oh, that's totally what I need. And millions of people a month, when things were still going freaking crazy and we had no idea what's going on with the economy, were freaking quitting. Because a lot of the like haters of it, they're like, when I was growing up, like we put 110% every day. It's like, okay, that's cool, and that's work for you, but let's be real. Showing up every day doesn't mean you're at 100 or 110% every day.
Hello. My name is Andrea Miller. I am the host of Open Relationships, Transforming Together. This is my co-host Cupcake, along with, and that for those of you who are listening, it's my cat on my lap, along with Joanna Schroeder and Brian Adkins. We have an amazing show for you today. We have Jenn Lim, who is a happiness expert, best-selling author, just a all-around superstar. So since we want to get into it, we're going to dispense with all the other blah, 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 and let's get Jenn on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Cheers.
Yay. All right. Amazing. Thanks so much, Brian. Jenn Lim. Oh my gosh, we're so excited to talk to you and to meet you, and you look fabulous. For anybody who is just listening, you can't see how amazing she looks. So quickly go to YouTube because she's got the hat, the glasses. Like, I want to like buy all that stuff. Anyway, okay, Jenn Lim is the CEO and co-founder of Delivering Happiness, best-selling author and founder of Beyond Happiness, and named one of the world's top 50 keynote speakers. She's had the privilege of leading a company to the Inc. 5000 fastest growing list, sitting on the Global Happiness Council of Work and Wellbeing, and working with hundreds of organizations from Fortune 500s and best places to work to startups and governments. Her mission is both simple and profound: to teach businesses how to create workplaces led with happiness and humanity that generate more profit, sustain all people at every level of the organization, and share how we can make an impact by being true to our authentic selves. Jenn inspires folks around the world on ways to find meaning, grit, and joy, even in the toughest of times. She reminds us how we can all ripple and impact when we get real with ourselves first. Jenn, welcome. You are amazing. We are excited to talk to you. You're such a guru. I've been downloading everything I can find, watch, read, listen about you. And thank you so much for all the incredible work you've been doing for, close to 2 decades now, or maybe more. And I wanted to say, in your book, Beyond Happiness, I was glad to see that not all people that worked at Enron were terrible, because I worked at Enron. I saw that I'm like, I think it was like it was like Enron and one of those other companies that imploded in the early 2000s. And I was like, oh gosh, okay, well, I'm here to represent. I always say I was in the international group, and nobody in our team went to jail, and we had real assets. So, I thought that was a funny little, I was like, cool. At Enron.
I'm glad it is easy to paint like a whole, it's like we all want to make a villain, right?
Exactly.
So I had never even heard that from Andrea. I've worked for her for 7 years. I've never heard that she was in the international group.
All sorts of new things are happening on our show today.
Yeah. But it's interesting though, because it does bring up that point of like, it's so much easier to be like, oh, we need an evil company. There's our like bad guy kind of villain in the story about business.
Yeah. That's why I love you brought it up. Because there's the evil companies, and then there's the companies that are like the best out there. But of course, underneath, it's like not always that consistent across the board.
You are totally anticipating what I'm going to be coming back to, because it's it's everything that glitters isn't gold, right? So we're going to come back to that. But where I was hoping we could start our discussion was where you started your book, Beyond Happiness, with your reflecting on Tony Hsieh, the legendary genius CEO of Zappos. You provided such a heartfelt tribute to him as your soulmate. I mean, it gives me chills, soulmate, partner, and friend. And you touched on your profound grief in losing him so abruptly. Everybody was shocked. We talk often about grief on the show because it's such a normal part of the human experience. And so I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about what happened, what your experience was, and if there are any lessons, because he seemed on the outside so larger than life and was. And yet, as a total outsider and reading about him, you go, oh gosh, it seems like there was some suffering going on. And we know in a world with a lot of mental health issues where that's pretty frequent, where everything seems to be okay on the outside, but not so much okay on the inside. So we'd love anything you can share on that dear man.
Yeah. I love how you're just going in there, Andrea. It's like, let's just get in there.
I know we're gonna go from like very happy and joyful to like the tough stuff.
I love it.
But that's
though.
what we do here
I love it
on the show.
I love it. I mean, that could be a whole show in itself. Just not just about Tony, but really, there's Tony's story and the bigger life story of it all, and I just happen to be a part of it. So. The reason why I started with it is because he passed 5 weeks before the book was due. And I didn't even have a title yet for the book. And so if you can imagine, I had 5 weeks to reframe the whole thing. It was unexpected. I mean, there was stuff going on, let's just be real. When it happened, it was so sensational. Like, let alone one of your best buds passing away, let alone the fact that he's a public figure. And so with all the processing, with all like me wanting to reframe the book and like, am I really going to put this out there? I mean, there was just so much stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of sensational noise about it. And of course, I can't blame people. Humans just want to understand. And so I was trying to sit still and quiet in my own space. People were asking a lot of questions and all that. And to me, it wasn't about this cautionary tale. I mean, this guy is a human being. And yes, he was amazing in so many ways. And he also had faults, like all of us.
Yeah.
But everyone wants to read that story, right? Or know that story of like the WeWorks or, the Theranoses of just like these big, larger than life characters. And like, yeah, of course there would be a downfall. At the end, he is a human being. And as much as he had a brilliant mind, he had the biggest heart. And anything you read is, there could be merit to it. But like, yeah, I just am grateful and blessed to have been a part of, shared experience of life. And I guess how I would, my own synthesis of it and processing is just like, there was a human being that I was able to have this super open, trusting relationship with. I'm going to go, first off, when I read about the title of your podcast, I'm like, yes, like this is awesome in all definitions of interpretations of open relationship. And that is exactly what Tony and I believed in that we have something to learn from everyone. And that's why like that relationship we had was just like, nothing's off the table. We could talk about anything from business to people to economy. And it was so free, liberating to have that. So the tie into this is that was his big belief in, doing all these things, envisioning all these things and do like, building and creating was at the end of the day, it was about people. And the happiness thing just happened to be called happiness. We could actually say, we can name it something else, but like, delivering happiness, the book, delivering happiness as a company, it was a universal way to connect. And I think beyond the sensationalism or even like within, like deeper, if we go deeper, that's what I would love people to remember him by, in his legacy of, things that are still happening, in what he did. So I don't know. There's so many ways I can go with this
Well,
topic.
that was
Yeah.
amazing. No, it was so amazing, and it's why as I started spending time getting to know you and your work, and obviously Tony's work, like literally kindred spirits, and we've been on a journey here at your Tango, the company that is behind open relationships for just about 2 decades, really.
Uh-huh.
And so many similarities. In fact, I got to tell you a funny one.
Good.
I was just this morning, one of my friends is very senior at a large Fortune 500 company. And I said, I want to send this book to you, and just said, the ideas, I mean, literally simple and profound. I would also say radical and obvious, right?
Uh-huh.
And here's what he says. It's easy to lose sight of those things in the midst of everything else. And I'm like ready to like pull my hair out and go, but it's those that, the culture, the people focusing on, being obsessively focused on your customers. Like, those are the main things. Everything else is the details. So let
Yeah.
me ask you why, I mean, you guys have been preaching this and educating people and consulting for such a long time. And again, we've been doing it too in our own way here at your Tango, but it seems radical and obvious, and yet it feels so even now, it just feels like it's so not sort of adopted. And it's
Yeah.
not me just saying that. I just looked at data the other day. Something like 85% of people feel very dissatisfied with their work, right? Which
Yeah.
is a bananas number, and all the ripple effect of days missed at work and lack of productivity. I mean, so corporate America is paying a huge price, and yet it feels like the answer is hidden in plain sight. So why is there such a big disconnect?
First of all, I love radical and obvious. It's just I haven't heard
I
it
mean,
put that way,
it's
but it is.
amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
yes, like we can do this, people, with just a little initiative. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Totally. No, like it's so true. And in so many ways, the things that we've been, sharing is not rocket science. This stuff is historically has been around since the test of time, since we've been around. And I think our biggest thing was just how to reframe it in today's terms. And so whether it was about happiness and now beyond happiness is kind of like, what is it, why does it matter today? And I think the resistance and the tension of it, because it's so obvious, but it's so unfortunately radical, is that, just that innate inability to change and adapt to actually what's not just what's in it for me, but actually what's in it for me and all. And I think because we naturally, just because of like we want to survive, like this goes back to our human instinct of knowing that like we're out to look for dangers and everything like that. And now it's like updated with social media and media in general. So we're naturally still gravitating towards those things. And when it comes down to it, there's a natural need to protect what's theirs. What's what my family deserves or what I deserve. And that's really hard to change when it comes to CEOs, when it comes to leaders of, governments, leaders of anything really. And that's been, I think, the biggest resistance is the change within self. Like if you really want to be a good leader, you really want to be a true and authentic one. I'm going to fast forward to today. In the last few years, since the world got 2020'd, did you really take a bit of time to reflect and go inward to ask yourself if you're truly being that leader? Because all those actions that happened since then are a reflection of whether you're going to be survival mindset, are you going to go back to like, oh, we need to cling to where we were, or are you going to think in a way that there's actually abundance? If you think about today's world versus generations where there was less abundance, less freedom, less luxury to be able to even consider these things that we're doing right now with practices of mindfulness, practices of like thinking that, hey, we can name burnout now. We can name, mental illness or mental health in the workplace. So things like that at the end of the day do make us feel or should make us feel that we have a bigger luxury than we did just my, last generation. Like, it's crazy.
No, like you say, it's
cool.
all, It's in the reframing. I that idea of, are you coming from a place of scarcity or a place of abundance? I've had to put that mirror up to my face many times, as a mom, as a leader, right, in a lot of situations. But what I wanted to also mention, one of my favorite quotes is, everybody wants to transform, nobody wants to change. And when I think about how hard and scary change can be, and I know that comes up in a lot of your work. It's like, that's the answer is being willing to embrace change and discomfort. And yet it feels somehow we are innately programmed to want to avoid it. And, it's also really interesting to me. You put these great graphs in your book where it shows the companies that perform the highest on employee and team satisfaction outperform the S&P and outperform all of these benchmarks. And I just want to say, ding, 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 isn't it obvious? Right?
Yeah.
And isn't it obvious? And so part of me, and I realize like Harvard Business Review and probably Forbes and Fortune and, Fast Company, I'm sure they report on this stuff quite a bit. I feel like especially HBR, I always joke, it's like you can't look at an issue without there being an article about emotional intelligence and leadership and, and compassion and those, what are, formerly called soft skills. But it still feels like there's a big gap between that intellectual knowledge and the implementation of it.
Well, that goes along with what I was going to ask. We're talking about these very high level sort of thinky terms of like, transform versus change. And it's so hard to, and what I'm doing right now is I'm talking to two very powerful leaders of companies, and I am an editor and a writer.
Who are you talking about?
Sitting here,
Jen, and who else?
You and Andrea. You two.
Andrea and Jen. I was like, is she having another conversation with somebody?
Yeah, no, but like here's
little
me.
gallows humor.
Yeah. But like, so here I am. I grew up in a small business family, and so I'm thinking, okay, Jen, I'm talking. Let's say, so my oldest brother took over my stepfather's company, and he's running it. It's like 150 employees. So when we're talking to them and they do a service and they have some machinery, they have people that drive trucks, they have people who are in a food prep situation. When we're talking about a company like that, and you're talking to someone like my brother or my sister-in-law and my niece who are running this company, what do you tell them? What are these things that are hard to change? Like, what are those concrete things in an everyday business where people are clocking in and clocking out? What does that look like?
Yeah, there's been a lot of layers that you just laid down right now for me. Like,
yes, sorry. What I'm really asking is,
Jen, what is the meaning of life? Just a small question.
No, but like on a concrete level, because it's so easy for us, those of us who think about and talk about philosophy and personal growth. But what about the average person who's clocking in and clocking out and managing a team, or a person who runs a company with 100 employees that they, it's a hard work every day, wear work boots kind of situation. Where are those new skills needed that maybe are hard to adopt?
Well, that's what I found the beauty of this. Like the things that I talk about is that it's so applicable across the board, universally, geographically. The stuff we've done globally is like, can we cuss? I don't know.
Yes. Oh, please. Fuck yeah. Excuse me. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. All right. All right. So holy shit. Like this actually applies. The science of happiness, positive psychology, all this freaking applies around the world and across socioeconomic situations. And in your case, like large companies and small companies. And even better, it's easier to do, even though it's not easy, in smaller companies because there's a greater locus of control. So, and going back to what you're referencing, Andrea, like in terms of those companies that essentially double down on their people, outperform the S&P 500 consistently over the last 10, 15 years, but more importantly, even during economic downturns. So that one's like totally black and white. And what I like to build on that, say, is to remind leaders of any size of companies that if we treat people as assets, not expenses, you will find that it actually pays, not just because your heart gets bigger and your chest gets warmer, it's because you're actually making more money and becoming a more sustainable business. So to answer your question, like sometimes, as I talk about laying that foundation of culture involves having a very specific higher purpose, because you're not selling widgets, you're not selling shoes, you're not just, doing what that company does. You're actually doing it with a greater purpose, doing it better, more than just making more money. And having that higher purpose and having values that are instilled within the company are like basically foundational ways to get everyone aligned and rallied so that they know they're not just doing it for the paycheck. But to your question, which is very important, especially right now, given the volatility and uncertainty of all this freaking world, what matters most is like the day-to-day stuff that people care about. Like sometimes we are living paycheck by paycheck. Sometimes we are dealing with, childcare. Like, what am I going to do if I have to go back to work in the office every day? So I think the most important thing when talking about purpose and values and embedding them in an organization is making sure whatever you're doing is making sure people understand it's for their betterment, for their individual life betterment. And that comes with being able to have leaders that are attentively listening to what's going on and saying honestly, transparently, like, look, we cannot solve everyone's problems, but if we want this company to grow because we want you to grow, we want to make sure you're feeling like you're going to have a job the next day, next week, whatever, next month, then therefore that connection is being bridged of not just what the company needs to be profitable, but having a constant dialogue with making sure everyone feels heard and understood as to how their needs are being met, knowing not everyone can be satisfied, but at least, and especially now, because anyone that says, oh, I got this figured out, like it's hybrid or it's in the office or remote, the truth is they need a reality appeal. Like there's no way anyone's got it figured out. So I think it really boils down to a different level of leadership in those quote unquote soft skills. It's like true leaders, and then it goes to HBR and all the other, media outlets you're talking about. They're integrating more of that stuff for a reason because it actually works. But the most important thing is like, don't compare yourself to any other company. You just got to figure it out for yourself. Your own values, your own brand, all that stuff, and your own higher purpose, and obviously your own people.
Just to piggyback on that, we had done a thing recently about the concept of corporate math, where basically people are, or like companies are putting too much on a single employee and then like making that the new baseline. So it's like, oh, maybe in the sense of COVID and stuff like that, where you had, oh, you have to wear multiple hats. So you had to do more jobs or whatever. And that didn't become temporary, it's permanent. And now you're doing the work of 3 people's jobs, and that becomes the new normal, where each person they bring on is now expected to do those 3 jobs or whatever it might be. And there's this level of like not being promoted and keep expecting to do more and more. And the idea of not being treated like a human at a certain point, where it almost feels like, how much can you squeeze out of me? You know what I mean? And that is where it like ties into, that's like so much of the discussion we got back from it was like, I just don't feel like a human at my job. And that's a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, I think would infinitely change that, because it's like feeling respected and at least feeling that the company is trying to like help you or to do better things goes so much more, you know what I mean? Like then how many pennies can we save by making one person do it all?
Yeah, totally.
And I can see that with COVID, because like if Brian got COVID right now, God forbid, but I'm sure he's fully vaccinated and ready to fight it. But then I'm like, oh, we have Jen booked today. I can step in and I can do Brian's job and my job. And then thankfully Andrea does not do this, but you can see how someone's like, well, we don't need Brian. Joanna did it both that one time, because
we need Brian. Let me just be clear.
We need Brian. Brian, you're going to be healthy for a long time.
No, but your point's a good one, Joanna. But I feel like there's, in reading the original book that you wrote with Tony, Delivering Happiness, when he talked about the original layoffs at Zappos and how tough it was, and then when he talked about in 2008, reading the letter about how 8% of the workforce was going to get laid off and what it meant and all that they did to provide extra severance, that transparency, that integrity, I was like, woo! Like, yes, it's a terrible outcome for 8% of the people, but just the dignity and humanity that Tony and Zappos showed, I'm like, how is it that, and I'm gonna name check, like Google, like remember a handful of months ago, Google laid off 10,000 people and they got an email, right? And it was just this profound lack of humanity. So Brian, kind of to 2 points. One, yes, there's that, oh yeah, let's just keep dumping stuff on people. But I feel like the other side of it is how are corporations and leaders communicating with people? That feels often where the dehumanization is most acute. I mean, and
Totally.
it's like, it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable. So how did all those people miss the memo? Because it's so obvious. Like, that's not what you do.
It is crazy. And I love the fact that you're bringing, it's like being more human. That's why I went, like delivering happiness is one thing, going beyond happiness is where I'm going, because it is about being human at work. And some got an email and others just woke up and couldn't freaking log in anymore. I mean, how dehumanizing is that? And people like they were there for decades.
It's a cluster.
We just learned that with a publication that we've been all reading for years that I'm not going to name, that couldn't,
does it rhyme with
sell to
Lezabel?
another. It might. They all of a sudden they just shut down the company Slack, and that's how everyone learned. And I think we forget, they're like, well, these people aren't going to work for us anyway. Well, how about everybody else working in the company who has seen that that's what they did? They just closed out your Slack channels.
Yeah,
that's how you learn.
What's going to cause to the rest of it is like there's survivor's remorse, and then there's just like there's going to be all anxious the whole time, wondering when they're next. But I think
that does not inspire loyalty.
No, opposite. The whole quiet quitting phenomenon, right? Like that's happening more and more as well. But I'm glad you brought up the Zappos thing, because that was back in the day. But like fast forward to now, I think I have to put out there like what Airbnb did at the beginning of COVID, and CEO Brian. Like that was a pretty analogous step, pretty bold.
It was brave and rare.
Yeah.
Can we share what that was?
Yeah, so they had a round of layoffs. I mean, you know how bad that was when travel was like put to a halt. And he just came out with this email that was very vulnerable and very honest about what was happening and the why. I mean, the biggest part of it, why is this happening? And then point by point of who's being impacted. Here are the resources. I mean, he actually dedicated internal resources to make sure as much as he can the people getting laid off would have another home to go to, work to go to, and then also talking to the people that stayed and making sure that they are still rallied and they're like, like, hey, we still have a future. This is like tough time. So all those, like, there was just another poster child, and that was just maybe one example of that whole time. The other ones were like on the opposite end of Zoom rooms and just basically inviting like hundreds of people and saying,
and just that you're all fired at once. I mean, it's like, how is it
no
even
idea it was happening. It was like they thought it was an update. So and then of course like what happened with Tesla, and like, that was a whole nother what is happening with how we're losing a sight disconnection from humanity. And there's just no excuse anymore. I know that, like, we all know a lot of people that go up the ranks and, like, become powerful, brilliant leaders in their own right. Like, we have to respect that value, but then being disconnected with the fact this person is a human being, that is, to me, where that line cannot be crossed. And now we have more choices and ability to just say and make a, think, step with our feet and step with our wallets towards what we think is right.
Well, let me come back. I want to ask you something that I referenced it in your bio, but I feel like it's so core to the people who have the integrity and courage versus those that don't. And I want to find out from you, how do we get real with ourselves first? Because my sense is the leaders who get real with themselves first are the ones that are more likely to understand that the importance of humanity and courage and integrity. So how do we do that? Because I think a lot of people go, oh, I want to get real with myself first. I don't know how.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is, especially as a leader, in recognizing all the things and decisions that you made to that point to your success. It doesn't necessarily make up who you are or necessarily what's right with, or what's actually the core of who you are. And getting real is a huge level of self-awareness, a huge level of being able to actually surround yourself with people that you can trust in that level of awareness. And it's really doing what I call the life work of, look, I've got all these strengths and this is all the like things I can contribute to society. But at the same time, I can also be open to recognizing my shadow sides, to recognizing my blind spots, to going deeper in those things that I've been, like putting under the rug because it's hurtful or painful or causes me anxiety or scary in ways that debilitates me because I can't do my job and I can't bring out this value in the world, without knowing that if you actually address those things, it'll actually create bigger value and more impact in deeper ways alongside all the other things that they're doing. So I think it's that's when true authentic leaders come out. It is by acknowledging and doing that work, knowing it's the whole rest of the life work, and being humble enough to understand that they don't have all the answers.
Well, totally. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there's this traditional idea of respect, like who should respect who, so that if I feel that Andrea might be doing something with the magazine that I disagree with, I could never say it because it'd be disrespect. But Andrea's always like, lay it on me. Bring it on. What should we do? What's your idea? And that's why so many of us have worked for her for so long. But I can imagine, especially when you get these older white guys that have been following a tradition of their fathers and grandfathers,
the patriarchy, idea, right? And the toxic individual
the idea of like,
right?
That assistant editor coming up to the CEO and being like, I have a thought. And it's like so disrespectful. You have to let go of the idea.
It's like questioning authority. Well, totally, but it's like faux power. And what makes me excited in listening to you, Jenn, because I've done a ton of my own life work. And when I think about it's afforded me so much freedom. And there's no way, you can't go around. You can only go through. But to me, the amazing secret in all of this is, I want to be a little careful here. I'm obviously not bulletproof, but I feel like I am way more powerful because I don't have things to hide, right? And I just feel like for other leaders to do that work, and I mean, it's just back to I can own it all, because it's so much easier actually and liberating to just to be authentic and to be open to where your shortcomings are.
It's
empowering. Not having to hide them, and not and not having to pretend there is like this faux veneer of perfection. Like, fuck that, right? Like that's dehumanizing. Like, to me, the whole thing is we dehumanize ourselves, right? Very unconsciously. And I feel like whether you're a leader of a big company or a smaller team or a leader of yourself, to do that work and you go, this is the greatest thing I can do for myself. Right. Yeah. It's the scariest, but it's also the most liberating and empowering.
Yes. And I think what you said in terms of freedom, it's like so many people have different definitions of freedom. And we're not talking about like freedom of where am I going to go for my next trip or what am I going to eat for lunch. It's like freedom of your own limiting beliefs, freedom from your own anxieties and stress that are coming onto you, because it's like you're literally lighter in terms of like emotionally, physically, and all that, because all this other stuff has been lifted up by acknowledging it. And that's when we're talking about you're liberated to think in more creative ways, because you don't have that burden of other stuff that you have to pretend to be, of this leader that you're like, of the veneer of what you want people to believe versus just who you are naturally, from inside.
It's radical and obvious. What can I say? It's radical and obvious.
Yeah. Not rocket science. But it's freaking hard. It is freaking hard. I do want to say, this stuff is not easy.
I agree.
It's the hardest thing we'll ever do. Honestly,
it is.
For leaders that have done amazing stuff, it's the hardest thing we'll ever do, to acknowledge the fact that we are not perfect or not, brilliant in all these different ways. But it's the most freaking worthwhile thing that we can ever do, just selfishly for ourselves. And therefore,
but I love
everyone else.
I love the idea for people that do that and show that, right? I mean, it's like we give permission to other people to shine their brightest, right? And I used to like when I would have success, I'd kind of like, all right, let me kind of like, be toxically humble, where because it's like, oh, I don't want other people to feel badly. And now I've been able to reframe that. It's like, Andrea, it's not about other people feeling badly. It's about you, again, being authentic and just that permission business. I mean, because as social creatures, I feel like when we're authentic and true to ourselves, both in the joys and highs, as well as in the lows and the fear and doubt, like to me that it all comes full circle in a way that is, again, really transformative. Sorry, Joanna, go ahead, please.
Well, I'm going to say two things, and one is I'm going to reference the Barbie movie, so please forgive me.
Oh no,
but I
Barbie all the way, as long as it's not like the Ken, whatever the Ken.
I'm not going to do the Ken dance.
We don't like the Ken Kingdom.
I'm not going to do the Ken dance. But I think about watching it with my 5-year-old daughter, and I did take her to it. Some people might say that was inappropriate, but watching the Barbies get up and like one receives like a Nobel Prize, and she's like, "Thank you, I worked hard, I deserve this," and like they just take the credit. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how revolutionary
scary is that. Can you even do that as a woman? Is that allowed?
You couldn't. You have to. It's only in Barbie land. Like it's we may want to modify that. Like thank you, I deserve it. You might want to show some love for your team.
But Snoop Dogg, there's a meme about that, right? Like I did all the work. It's all me. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, but there's a balance to that. Yeah, the idea of like, oh, no, the company isn't where I want it to be yet, but thank you very much. As opposed to like, thank you, we've worked so hard. I have a great team. I really have a vision. Being able to balance giving credit and love out while acknowledging your own hard work and your own commitment to being successful. The other thing I was going to say is you all are talking about there's a burden to having to be strictly in this traditional kind of structure where things don't change. And I think of Rosalind Wiseman did a sociological study on the structure of boys' lives, their social structures, as if they were a foreign culture, boys in our culture. And the masterminds, it's called Masterminds and Wingmen. The masterminds are the number one guy in the group, okay? And then there's all these different layers, and it's much like a business. There's a money bags and there's a joker and there's a whatever in this social structure. The masterminds are, even in the most popular groups, are some of the most unhappy boys in the school. Because they have such a burden to have to always have that leader face, that perfect face. You can't
feeling like they have to have the answer, right?
They have to have the answer. They have to know where the party is. They have to always dress that way that they're expected to dress and date that person. It's a burden, and it does make me think of how, I don't know if it's a chicken or an egg, but we then take those boys or those girls in the girl culture and we promote them, and then they go on and they keep doing this perfectionistic thing and this I know the way, I don't need your advice, and it becomes a burden to that leader,
because it's about expectations.
That's a very much hallmark of the patriarchy. Sorry, Jen, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, because I think it's based on, and this kind of blends in with your earlier point too, but because of that social external expectation that keeps on growing outside of them, and when you continue to be answering to that versus what's actually going on inside and the core, and doing the life work of actually what's going on inside, that just keeps on building and building all these layers and facades of what you think you need to be based on those expectations. But what I think could be helpful in all this of that Barbie of like, acknowledging and taking, if you credit's due for yourself, at the same time, credit's due for the team, etc. Something that I think we can be better at is making sure that those, like the sentiment of we are in service of, coexist between both ourselves. I'm in service of myself, because I know if I'm not true and honest and authentic, I have nothing that I can share that will benefit others. And then in service of others, coexisting at the same time. If we can keep those in our mind, then it's okay to take that, like that accolade for self, but then just realizing what we're here for too, in service of others.
Yeah, I feel like that's wisdom, right? And having that balance, humility is such a virtue, right? But so is confidence. And so it does feel like it's finding that balance. But
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the greenhouse method, because it feels like this conversation is naturally leading to that and how we grow each other. I just love that concept. But will you talk about what the greenhouse method is, and then, how do
Yeah.
we practice it?
Yeah. So it goes back to, okay, so there's a couple things. So, I've been in the happiness space, as you said earlier, almost 2 decades. Crazy, but from
Yeah.
and it's just so interesting to see how that's evolved. And what I realized, there will be still people that, within the workplace, C-level CFOs, nothing against you, but I know you're all about the number. But it's they'll always say, there's just naysayers. It's it just does not belong there. Happiness, you can figure it out yourself, but just not in the workplace. So I'm not here to twist anyone's arm, because I know that happiness, real sustainable happiness, is about higher purpose, it's about authenticity, things that don't normally, it's not the rainbows and unicorns things, but things. And so for me, going beyond was talking about what is something that people cannot deny, especially since what we went through in the last few years. It's we can't deny that we want to grow. And so that's how I sort of evolved it to the greenhouse method. And it was sort of evolved from this idea that Tony and I used to talk about. So Tony was we're all leaders, as we could think of it as a greenhouse, because we as leaders want to create the conditions for others to grow. And I said, yes, we don't have to be the biggest tree, tallest plant, whatever.
Right.
But we want to create those conditions. And I was like, hell yes. But what I realized during writing, the book writing during 2020, was that there was a big part of the equation that we were missing, which was, yes, we naturally want to, tend to others' greenhouses, but at the same time, we have to tend to ourselves. And that was the biggest learning. And again, not rocket science, but, it's the whole metaphor of, when you're in a plane, oxygen mask, you first. And we freaking forgot. We forgot because, we couldn't fly for a few years, so we maybe forgot because of that. But we just have not reinstilled that in today's terms. How do we actually be the best leader, be the best mom, dad, whatever it is and what we want to lead in, while making sure we're nurturing and tending to our own greenhouse too. So that's the premise of it all. So in the book, I kind of go more on the brass tacks of how we actually do it. But that's the background.
But I just love it. I mean, it's such a wonderful visual. I'm also a gardener. And when I just think about the idea of, okay, greenhouse, here in Colorado, you don't grow things in December typically, but it's just such a great metaphor for how we grow each other. We interviewed a really wonderful, actually, John Gottman's number one psychotherapist. Her name is Sue Johnson. And this concept of growing each other is something she talks a lot about. And it just, again, it's so, in a lot of ways, it's so obvious. And yet it's there's such an opportunity to talk about these things and try to internalize them. Okay, I have only about 1 million more questions, so hopefully you've got about 17 hours. Just kidding. You had mentioned quiet quitting, and I think Joanna and Brian are like, oh yeah, quiet quitting.
Yeah.
Oh God, on the one hand, I want to say it's BS, and yet, in fact, I'll share this little anecdote. So I kind of had a little it's so stupid, because I think, as somebody who's so self-motivated and has had the benefit of running a company for a long time and building a culture that's strong, in my mind, I'm manifest destiny, right? Make it happen. And if it's not happening for you, make it happen, kind of thing. And then on further, more humble reflection, I thought, oh, there are people in these sincerely toxic workplaces where it's like a abusive relationship, where they're quietly quitting because they actually can't make it happen for themselves. And whether it's an abusive boss, or like Brian was saying, more and more is getting layered upon them. So I did, just want to give that extra reflection. But I'd be curious about your thoughts about quiet quitting, and what can bosses do to help avoid their team wanting to do that to them.
Yeah, so I think there was merit to quiet quitting, and the fact that it was a TikTok phenomenon, and it was got viral and all that stuff.
Well, and there is an empowerment in that, right? Saying, I'm going to take the power back.
It was just, I think people were just when they first saw that, it was oh, that's totally what I need. And we saw the pendulum swing. I mean, the Great Resignation was also an indicator of that. It's millions of people a month when things were still going freaking crazy and we had no idea what's going on with the economy, we're freaking quitting. So I think there's something to be learned in, because a lot of they're like haters of it. They're like, when I was growing up, like we put 110% every day. It's like, okay, that's cool, and that's work for you. But let's be real, showing up every day doesn't mean you're at 100 or 110% every day. Showing up every day means you're showing up as yourself that day. That means some days you're freaking thriving, some days you're freaking not. And knowing there's that spectrum at any given day, and you could be feel like you're multiple things at once, but being able to name that, I think, is most important. And I think for leaders to, again, really create that sense of like attentive listening through psychological safety is a huge part of where we're at right now. And psychological safety, real quick, if I think it's an important study that really like drives this in, how important it is. Like Google did this thing called the Aristotle Project, and this was about 30,000 employees, 3 years longitudinal study. Their one question was, how do you make the most effective teams? And you would think, oh, it must be the manager or the technology, but it wasn't. It was psychological safety for those teams that could celebrate their wins and say, oh shit, we fucked up, like openly. Those were most effective. And that just also speaks to the kind of teams we want now, less hierarchical, more about self-management, more about autonomy, all those things that are wrapped around what that means. But going back to this notion of psychological safety, if you really want to absolve those fears of quiet quitting, open up that space and don't penalize people, don't fire them on the spot for sharing things. Create a sense of belonging. I mean, this is a big buzzword right now, and actually do that. Those are the things that I think can help address, and then therefore make sure you have more well-informed data and qualitative, quantitative input into your decisions of how you need to adapt. So I think it's important to just put it out on the table, and I think that's how we're going to be able to navigate in this super complex world.
Well, totally. I didn't realize it was called the Aristotle Project. So thanks. I probably have gone back. The New York Times covered that Google study in the T magazine, and I think or Times Magazine, or whatever it's called, like 7 years ago, maybe. And I remember reading it and going, again, radical and obvious. And to your point, where it's like, oh, are these the smartest people? Are they the people that look the most alike? And it's like, ding, ding, ding. They just happen to create safety among themselves. And I mean, it's like, again, radical, but something that I also feel like is so accessible. We'll pop that into the show notes, a link to that, because I do think, I mean, I've shared it with, I can't tell you how many people. It's like, oh, hey, this is a good idea, right? So obvious, but so valuable. Okay, on a related question, it's all quiet quitting, and it's all the tension between, for people who are able to work from home, and a big shout out to the teachers, to the policemen, to the nurses, to the grocery store shelf stockers, the people that can't work remotely. Thank you a million. We are so grateful. But for those of us who can, who are, if you will, in the knowledge economy and so forth, what would you say to Elon Musk and these others that insist on back in person?
I would say, and we've learned this from the past too, like, I don't know if you remember, Marissa Meyer did it in Yahoo.
Oh,
like,
yes. Oh my gosh, she got skewered.
She did, because she also hired, like, she had her own nursery for her child next to her office.
Yes, and just for everybody listening, Marissa Meyer was the CEO of Yahoo, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
and took over and insisted on people coming back to the office. But it was like a trust deficit, right? My memory of it was she felt like, well, I guess they could be home and not working, and she was skewered for it.
Yeah.
And then in contrast, you've got Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia, who forever has had a workplace culture where you could just propose what would be the best structure for you, and incredible childcare and preschool right there in the building. And he did that, I don't know, he started that like in the 80s or 70s. He started doing that.
So enlightening.
Yeah.
And
Patagonia is a
walking
model
that
of enlightenment.
walk.
Totally. Yeah. With consistency. And so to answer your question and kind of tying that in, like when you unilaterally make this decision, like you got to come back in the office because that's the way we're going to get more productive again. And like back to you, engagement again. It's just, if you don't have the why behind it, it's just not going to stick. And
or
I think
a
that's
real
why
why versus, hey, we're paying our ungodly rent and we want to be able to justify it to ourselves. Like, that's not a good reason.
Yeah. Like the true why of having a bit of like data to back it up based on what's been going on specific to the company, specific to that location, specific to the people in it. So that I just think is just based on more of like old school thinking of like, oh, something's got to change. And so that we knew this worked before, but it really doesn't work today. And so I think that's the biggest thing of like being understand in today's terms and doing the research just enough to understand. And that includes like the sense of psychological safety and understanding what people are saying, using that, at least having a more educated hypothesis on what we're going to try. So it's going to be hybrid for some folks. It's going to be in the office for some folks. And these are the reasons why. And sometimes it's like, you have to, like, you got to, if you're going to be a nurse or a doctor, you got to show up, like, and then sometimes there's not.
Right.
Like if you're in the admin office, there's other reasons. And so everyone actually, as a leader, makes these decisions, and everyone being able to understand that makes the biggest difference. You might not love it. It might not be ideal for you. And then, this is easier to say than BC before COVID, but it's really time to ask yourself, is this how I want to be spending my time? With this boss, with these leaders, with my coworkers? Because if you think about it in the broad spectrum of how we spend our lives, I mean, you've heard this before, like when we're working, most of our lives is spent with our coworkers. And then you got to ask yourself, like, do I really want to be around people or bosses that I can't stand for my life? So,
God, no. God, no. Please get a different job, right? I mean, for anybody who is going, oh, that's a tough decision, let me just give you the answer. Get a new job. I mean,
I know it's hard.
Don't pay that price.
Yeah. If anything, the Great Resignation is indicative of like, look, we are at least prioritizing our, like, what's most important from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep. At least we're taking a bigger reflection on how we want to spend that time.
Well, so one thing you said was come to your employees with data. So that old model of like, you have to come in because I said so, because we need to watch you every second while you work. And that's going to make people hate you. And you're saying, but come to them with data, like really come. Because so for my husband runs a company and he has had trouble with certain aspects of having people working from home. And what I'm hearing from you is that might be a thing that doesn't work as well for some parts of your company. And instead of just being like, everyone's coming in, the end, or everyone in this department has to come in 5 days, it's more like do the research, find out, A, if you're actually correct that your company does better when everyone's in the office. And then B, if it's true that for whatever reason it runs better, you're more productive, you're more profitable when people are in the office, show that to people. And then ask for their feedback maybe about how do we, if you want to be hybrid, how can we get to this thing I can show right here while you're working hybrid and include them in that conversation? Because I think we're in a binary right now where it's like evil boss needs people in office and then nice boss lets people choose. Yeah. But there may be a place where it's like, gosh, being able to be more productive and profitable actually helps us because we're going to help you in this way.
Yeah, totally. And then becomes a virtuous and in what you're saying, it becomes a virtuous cycle because nothing is static. We need to adapt. And by having that process of collecting that data, synthesizing what that might mean, offering this is something we're going to test for the next 3 months so that everyone knows that like we're not stuck in this for the rest of our life. And then just like in learning and then embedding and integrating that into the next becomes more of what we actually need to do, which is actually adapt, knowing that things keep on changing around us. Sorry, Andrea.
It's great practical advice.
Well, totally. Yeah. I mean, it comes back to that adaptation. One of our new team members, Nicole, recently said something to me about getting comfortable with discomfort. And it's so obvious again, but I was like, oh yeah, that's a superpower, right? And, and discomfort in the face of uncertainty, that's a superpower, right? But it's profoundly uncomfortable. But I want to ask about our work. So we're, kind of, when I think out of the office versus in the office, we at Your Tango are completely virtual. We've been completely virtual for 7-8 years, and some of my favorite closest friends work with me, and some of them I haven't met in real person. It's crazy. So we've proven that it works, but I also get, having worked in brick and mortar in previous places like Enron, that there is something about that up close and personal. And Zappos, I mean, in you guys writing that book and describing that culture and so forth, it would stretch the imagination to believe that there would have been as much intimacy if everybody was completely remote. And so I want to ask, because you guys talk a lot about in the book, work friends, right? And how these really were a big part of, especially when Zappos moved from San Francisco to Las Vegas, that it was like, well, there are 70 people, you may not know anybody in Las Vegas, but 69 other people that have moved along with the company. Those are your friends. So my question for you, can work friends be real friends? Why or why not?
I have a super simple answer. Hell yes.
Woo, thank you. We need to ring the bell. Cowbell.
Hell yes. And again, going back to that stat, the people that we spend time with most at the end of the day are coworkers, our partners. Same thing applies there. If you're not getting along with them, you really should find a new one. And then ourselves. So those 3 things. So why not really try to find those that are really work friends? And the way we found it work at Zappos, and then with delivering happiness and how we help the organizations figure it out, is like you can have different opinions on politics. You can have different opinions on what you want to eat for lunch or what you want to drink at night. But when you really instill and embed what true values are, what your true behaviors are out of those values, and that higher purpose, that's what we actually more intrinsically and in a deeper way connect on. Because all of a sudden, when you're talking about things that are not like, what are you watching on Netflix, or what are you binging on anything? And when you're talking about how does this value apply to you? So one of our values is be true to your weird self. How does that apply to you? If it's a value about integrity or connection or whatever those values are, when you hear people talking about their values and their purpose in their own lives, and you'd be surprised, even in our team, we have people all across the board on the political spectrum and all across the board in terms of what they think about really, really divisive potentially topics. But we all connect and we all align because we share a higher purpose. And for ours, it's going beyond happiness now, but that's where those real friendships come from, because you're basing it on what's actually most meaningful, inside, not just on the external
This feels
stuff.
So key. And Andrea and I talk about this all the time, where it's like, how have we gotten to the point in society where I would only talk to somebody who votes like I vote? I would never be friends with somebody who votes differently. And you're making such a good point, because I think back to my job where I worked in a store from 2001 to 2005. And it was like, we were all so in it together that when something divisive happened, it was like, yeah, but I know their work ethic. I know that person shows up for me. I know that person is the one that's grueling when the computers break alongside me. So that difference becomes less relevant. Whereas I can see without our in-office, or in that case, in-store culture, I could just take that person's politics and let that define that person.
Yeah, become caricatures. Well, I want to chime in because I think, there's so much richness in this. I promised, harken back to my Enron days. So I was a analyst living in India in the late 90s, and it was like us against the world mentality. We had a shared purpose in a huge, very much groundbreaking power project we did. And they hired a lot of very type A, hardworking people. And it reminds me, honestly, of Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, and the various examples he uses And obviously at the extreme, it's dangerous, right? When we see political tribalism, that's very bad for society. But when you think of, organizations, and even I was in New York after 9/11, and the feeling of, oh, you're a stranger on the street, we're in it together, baby. Right. And he showed all these examples of having that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose. And so when I think about when I've been motivated, or how the Enron experience, where it was a very close knit group of people that worked hard for that common outcome, that's what I wanted to replicate in building my business. And it doesn't matter what the business is. It's that feeling of we're in it together. We trust and respect each other. I mean, again, radical and obvious. And yet it's like that has enabled, like you said, Joanna, we have so many of our team have been with us 5, 10, some 15 years. Okay, so I have I have a kind of a corollary to that. So if hell yeah, work friends can and are real friends, we are real friends, Brian and Joanna. I mean, of course we are. What about your workplace being your family? Is that something that you espouse, or is that like, oh, that's the bridge too far?
That's been controversial.
I know. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah. You got some good questions there, Andrea. I love your questions. I think that, so it's controversial because some people just like draw that line again of like, has to be a distinction. And so for me, I think it can be applicable, but it doesn't have to. Yeah. And it really depends on that organizational culture, organizational leadership, how you define it. Because who got bit in the ass? I think the Salesforce CEO.
Mark Benioff. Yes. Oh my God. He totally.
You remember what
he was like?
He really screwed that one up.
Poor guy.
He did win. And to give him credit with credit, see, he's done a lot of really amazing stuff with his culture.
He's done a lot of amazing things, and he's human too, right? I mean, that's
what you guys explain.
We want leaders to be authentic, right? Okay, good call.
So it was a Hawaiian. I'm not remembering the term right now, but it's basically a Hawaiian saying for family.
Aloha, or not aloha.
No, not hello.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
It's what Disney named their resort. Ohana.
Yes.
Oh, there he goes. Thanks, Brian.
That's close. Got the same vowels. But yeah, it was. He did it during. He mentioned it during layoffs. I think it was beginning of this year. And so there was just a lot of back chatter, and not so back chatter because now everything's so public amongst people that were at Salesforce and saying, this does imply this does not feel like that at all. Like this, where's the Ohana in this?
Well, and he was really late to it was like he was doing a big layoff, and he was like 20 or 30 minutes late. I mean, there were a handful of things. And again, he's brilliant and a genius, and he screwed up, and he's human. But it
was just a bit tone deaf that day. That day. Just hit off the mark. But so that's where I think the biggest thing is making sure like you're actually walking your talk. If you are saying it's a family atmosphere, what does that mean? And is that what you're actually doing? Another example, Netflix is like, we are not a family. Like, just don't get that. That's not part of our language. And so it's like really like having that clarity and defining what that means. I think that's the biggest thing. So it can exist, but it doesn't have to.
Well, I was just editing an article for one of our experts who said, don't have a work wife or a work husband because it makes you loyal in a way that's going to harm your career. And it's a strong position. And that's why I like the article, actually, because she's saying you become unnaturally loyal. You're not pledging forever to this person at work the way you would with a spouse. And that framing is going to end up setting you back. What do you think of that?
I never heard the potential downside of that.
That was the first time I heard that too. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's interesting.
Well, I guess there's a reason why people get divorced, right? Because it's not working.
They're holding it back.
Or separation. Yeah. I don't know. I think that whole thing I think it's all in the framing of it, right? Like, is it a healthy relationship or not? And I think it can be used in beneficial ways. And
I want to chime in aside. Go ahead. Go.
So total random aside, like talking about a work wife or husband. So my CFO, his name is Eugene, and I call him Huge for short. So every time I'm like, hey, Huge, it automatically does the autocorrect to wife. So my iPhone knew it was my work wife before I did. And then I'm like, oh, you are my work wife.
Oh, that's
so
hilarious. Funny. That's so cute.
Have you heard of the concept of... Oh, I'm sorry. No, you go first.
No, go, Brian. I know where you're going, and that's such a better thing than I'm about to say.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just say, like, we talk about it a lot. Have you heard of the concept of, like, the work mom? Where, like, Gen Z, like, women will be in the workplace and they'll, like, want to seek out, like, those who are more established and stuff to kind of, like, go under their wing. And there's been, like, this meme of, like, oh, hey, how was your day, honey? And it's like, oh, yeah, this, like, new 22-year-old girl, like, really loves me at the office. And it's like, oh, how do I tell her you just became her work mom?
Is it gender specific?
Right.
I mean, is it not the young men and the young women, or is it really young
probably.
women looking for... Okay.
We probably frame it familially through some sort of patriarchal thing where as a young man goes into a workplace, he has a mentor. Whereas like if Deanna, who is our assistant here, comes in, she might see me as a work mom instead of a mentor. Just that kind of weird gendered thing, actually.
Well, I'd almost like... I was gonna say it almost feels more protective though, because it's like the work mom does want to
totally
like keep
different
you
vibe.
safe.
Yeah, one is that maternal looking out for each other. You know, there's a little more of an intimacy implied. But hang on, we're not even letting Jen answer. Jen, we're gonna be quiet now.
I'm not sure there was a question in there.
Oh yeah, I don't think there was a question in there. I think we're all just talking.
Well, have you heard of that concept and stuff?
Oh no, actually I haven't. But it's an interesting point made about like the gender thing, the work mom versus work dad.
Brian just wanted to say work mom on the air.
Okay,
yeah. No, totally.
Check that box. Ching.
Yeah, I need a work mom. That was my call to...
Okay, I have more questions. Okay.
Listen.
Should we all be worried that AI will replace our jobs? I think you've written about AI and all that jazz. So do you have an opinion here?
Yeah. So I think stuff that maybe you read in the book obviously was, before ChatGPT blew up.
Yeah.
And so now even more so, I think that when people talk about future of work, we talked about that for a long last time. And then all of a sudden 2020 happened and the future of work was happening then and now. Like it's happening. All the stuff of like, remote and all the stuff of robotics and AI. So we're living in it. And so I think this is prime time. Of course, there's going to be fear of what AI is doing. It's doing amazing stuff. At the same time, there's going to instill this sense of fear of like, holy shit, like how I'm going to, basically 80% of what I do on a day-to-day basis can be done by ChatGPT. So I think it's normal to have that fear. Going back to where we started with this conversation, it's like, we want to survive. We want to be able to thrive. It's like, but then let's think about, because my interpretation of the future of work is human, because we knew this was coming. We knew major transformation was going to happen with the advent of this and the whole topic of singularity and basically when computers overtake consciousness of, humans and intelligence. So because we knew that was coming, and now the difference between AI is going to evolve is how we do it with a sense of integrity and ethics and things that have been always important, but now all of a sudden heightened. So what I would say to your question is like, because we knew this and the fact that we are aware of these changes that are going to be exponentially happening that we can't even control or predict, let alone what happened with ChatGPT. It's going to even go even quicker at exponential rate. I don't think we need to fear it though, because I think that we are learning more and more because it's out there now. We're actually understanding what it can and cannot do today. And therefore, that's why I think this whole life work is so important, to understand that in tandem. So then the fear is dialed down and the more sense of control and autonomy we have of what we know we could put on the table as a human being that AI cannot, at least for now, replace. That is where I think we should be focused on, and why the future of work is more human, because those are the questions that we need to answer more intentionally.
It's a good reminder too to think about the things that we've been afraid of in the past, and how change is always scary. Like I think about when my oldest nephew was born, my grandfather was certain that him drinking out of a sippy cup meant that he would never learn how to drink out of a cup.
Wow.
He was like, you can't let him have that sippy cup. This is horrible. He's never going to learn how to drink out of a cup. And I can say now he's a college senior and he knows how to drink out of a cup. So like, but it was new, right? Like the things we're so afraid of. And then it becomes normal. And then the kids do a new thing, or the young people, or the computer programmers, and we become afraid of it. It's like, remind yourself, everything new is scary.
Yeah.
And then
but I think that even goes back to doing your own work, right? Because when I think about if you're willing to do your own work and face your own scary truths, which for most people, they're actually not that scary. They're common. That if you are willing to do that, I feel like you are much more prepared to face the scary things outside of you. And I for sure have found that in my own business. I mean, we've been through a handful of near-death experiences. My husband, Sanjay, was so supportive. I mean, I remember a couple of the early days where it's like, oh, we're not going to survive. And he's like, that's just a problem to be solved, right? And rather than, oh my gosh, the world's coming crashing down. And so now I'm so much more courageous because I've had to face so many of these scary things and done a lot of my inner work. But it makes me think exactly to what you're saying, Jen. It's like, we're going to be, people will be, people in our society more broadly better prepared. But I bring it back to the individual because let's face it, it's all about what, each individual is doing. Are they going to show up and be fearful, or are they going to go, oh, here's an opportunity? And even listening to, Delivering Happiness, when I think about what Tony and his pals were doing in the early 90s and the business that they built by being curious and taking some good risk, right? It makes me think that willingness to experiment and try things is available to just about everybody. And so, I have the optimism that you have. And, but I do feel like it's back to, how can each of us be personally empowered in the face of what can be scary change?
Yeah. And I would actually say it's not just optimism. I think it's optirealism in that.
I think it's very right? Oh, I like that word
as well.
Yeah.
We both just picked up our pens to write that word.
I know.
At the same time, we were both like,
Jen Lim says optirealism.
Literally at the same moment. Pens are out.
So good.
That's when you know you're setting something interesting.
Okay, I've got a couple other things that I love in your book.
Going back, can I just make a mention real quick of what you just said in that, why it's so important for the individual self, because and it ties back to something you started this conversation with, is like why it's important to go inward to the internal stuff, because we know things are impermanent. And going back to you starting this conversation with, like, Tony died, we're all gonna die, we're all gonna lose ourselves, we're all gonna lose people that we love, like, that is not being morbid, it's just being real. And so therefore what can we do in a life of impermanence is to focus on what we can control within. And that's like, no matter what, we have this unforeseen stuff coming, at least we can ground ourselves in that. And that's our
my God. Brian, can we get our whole studio audience clapping right now? Thank you. Woo, woo.
That's AI.
And that's it. Yeah. No, it's not. We have like 4 people sitting here
in my little real claps.
Yeah.
We do always joke about the word AI and how it's like, now we never would have called it AI before. We have a million things we were using that used AI. We just didn't call it that before. Now it's much scarier, right?
I mean, literally autocorrect.
Yeah.
Yes, autocorrect. So many things, right?
Something I heard the other day was really cool. Like, AI is artificial intelligence, but it also is ancient intelligence. And if we put those things together and what we can keep with the ancient and actually blend what's beneficial with artificial. But anyway, that was just a little.
I've always called it like programmatic, basically. Like I know we like the idea of artificial intelligence being not just sentient but sapient, and like that like almost pipe dream of like, these thinking robots that are walking around. But in reality, artificial intelligence is just stuff that's like focused and designed to do usually a like singular task. You know what I mean? And it's like we said, like, it's autocorrect. Google's "Did you mean this?" Or related anythings, like all this stuff. It's just now gone to the extreme where it's like you can program a much larger task, but in reality, like especially as someone who does stuff creatively for a living, there's a lot of fear of like, oh well, AI art do this, that, or the other, replace. And it's like you still need people to be driving creative decisions. You still need that. Like most of this stuff, at least in today's day and age with AI, it's like it's removing a lot of the legwork and a lot of barriers to entry, and that can be kind of scary. But like that idea of like fully being replaced by like autonomous self-thinking and self-producing things, I think at least in today's day and age is still like a pipe dream.
It's probably maybe 6 months away. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, like Jenn was saying, psychological safety. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking right now, if I'm in charge of a workplace and I know that collectively people are very worried about AI, I'm thinking I'm going to get ahead of this with my people, because like Jenn said, create psychological safety. One of those things might be, hey, listen, I want to talk about this. What are your fears as far as AI in this company, and how can I reassure you how valuable you are to me?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot in that training, right? And being as much as companies can be ahead. In fact, I was chatting with the person that runs AWS, Adam Slipsky, recently, and he was just saying like it's like 1995 compared to the internet. It's like as far as how much is going to change and transform. So on the one hand, it's exciting and scary, and yet at the same time, it's like we're not even in the bottom of or top of the first inning. It's like we're like, oh, there's a baseball field out there that I say that because AWS is putting a ton into AI, right? Maybe both A's, ancient and artificial. A lot of good ancient stuff, being very radically customer focused. Okay, I've got another burning question or two for you. I think this is less of a question than a like woohoo huge observation that I just loved in reading your book. Toward the beginning, you had Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And most people will know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the very bottom. And your version, it's internet, good Wi-Fi, working in internet. I thought that was funny. But it's food and water and shelter, and then money and then at the top is, most people probably know, self-actualization. But Jenn has this really cool superimposed triangle on the top that says transcendence and helping others self-actualize. I just was, boom, that's a word, that's a word about,
that's
right? At your tango. Revolutionizing relationships is our whole jam. So when I saw that, I literally was chatting with one of my colleagues and I said, oh my gosh, Maslow's hierarchy is wrong. Jenn Lim figured out what it really should be. So I'm just saying, like, thank you and amen. And in a way, I feel like that comes back full circle to our conversation, right?
Well, now I wish I could take credit though, but I actually didn't come up with that.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I read it from you first, so I'm going to give you credit. But where did it come from then?
So, I thought I wrote this in the book, but
okay.
So actually, what was really
that maybe why I speed read.
You were like, I understand. You're just skimming the thing. It was late, but actually, when I was researching for the book, what was fascinating to me is like we've heard of it for so long, and we've seen that pyramid in that state for so long. But what I realized, or what I learned, was that Maslow, before he died, actually added the transcendence piece on his own, but it never got socialized. So he realized it's not a self-actualization.
So he gets credit for his own. Oh, smart.
Yeah.
Oh
so
my goodness.
Was like, we want to self-actualize others. So that was his. I was just pointing it out. Like, wait, why did this not get on there?
It's amazing. We'll see if we can link to it in the show notes. And it's actually surprising, given that isn't much more common. So we're gonna see if we can do our part to popularize that, because it's again obvious and radical. That's the theme today. When we put this out there, the show is going to be obvious and radical with Jenn Lim.
Isn't that how all revelations go, though? Where you're like, man, that was so
I mean, you're onto something. I feel like that's when it's real and lasting, and that that's what kind of gets me personally fired up. Okay, and so back to relationships. One of my favorite questions to ask amazing guests on our show is about their uninvited Buddhas. People that, and it can come in, this person or condition or experience can come in many forms. Often it's the form of some kind of resistance, maybe even a resentment. It could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be a coworker. That person is like, oh, they're making you crazy. And then and eventually you go, oh my gosh, they had something really important to teach me. So do you have an uninvited Buddha in your life that you can share with us?
Yes, I do.
And will you share? But that's what we say with our kids. We'll be like, can you? Yeah, yes. Will you? No.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, I'll say one. I'll say a couple because there's one that's just like kind of really obvious when you have a loving mother-daughter relationship and how that our relationship is so much better than it was a few years ago, but it's still like, it's every day I'm learning about this, like, there's these tensions and all that stuff, but it's so beautiful how it can actually change in ways you never thought. But the other, the more present one right now is those that are, and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but like those that are weaponizing purpose, the use of the word purpose, and spirituality. Those that are weaponizing spirituality. So what's been so fascinating, okay, so back up, being in the happiness space is so interesting. Like those people that are experts in the field are some of the most unhappiest people I know. Because like, it's just like, they're so into like espousing all this research and all this stuff. And then it's like, are you really, are you really living it? So that was then, and this is now in terms of now my own interest in, purpose has been a long time in terms of like sustainable happiness, but let's just take examples of when companies, and I said this before, like WeWork or Theranos, when they're saying we're changing the world, and they have a very obvious disconnect between their ways about it, like the hows of the values and all that stuff. And that to me is just, that is just unfair to their people, to their teams, to their, to their customers, to society. That's just like the weaponizing purpose. The other one is spirituality, in the sense of, as I've been getting, wanting to learn more about it, there's some that like really are just hell-bent on their way of spirituality as the way. And there's I understand the passion behind it. I
understand
the
big ego in there, right? There's a big ego in that, which is ironic, a little hypocritical.
The thing we're trying to transcend, and that's what brings them back to a place of like, oh, now I'm holier than thou, without saying it or maybe even realizing it. So I think those are things that those are people I can learn from, and really checking myself as I keep on wanting to mindset this stuff.
Through working in this type of self-help and relationship, being an editor, I will say this, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but in general, when I have white people call themselves gurus or shamans, and they are all about, ascension and goodness and you give them a little while and you find that they can be some of the cruelest, most self-serving people. And of course, if you call yourself a guru or a shaman and you are not,
you're not allowed to call yourself. I mean, that's just like rule number one. Number one before anything else. You can't call yourself a shaman. I mean, unless you're actually a shaman administering ayahuasca in the Amazon. In that case, please call yourself a shaman and tell me how to find you.
Well, yes, and because there's these words have definitions, gurus and shamans, right? And if you're connected to the culture, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the person who names themselves, a shaman of inner peace, and they grew up, completely normal mainstream white Christian culture. To me, that's a sign that they're marketing themselves on someone else's culture. And to me, that's immediately, I put up a boundary. I immediately have
but they have something to teach you. Then that's your uninvited Buddha, right?
That's what that's how I'm getting. That's what I'm getting from Jenn too. Is it's like, it's so uncomfortable. It's so awkward, but it's also like, wow, I've really learned that those are the people I first put up a boundary with. Just like, oh, yep, okay, cool, I'll hear you.
Yeah, you're not okay.
Yep, got it.
No, I love that.
I
love those examples.
And just to be honest, when we first started the show, like Andrea, you used the word guru for me, and I was like, oh, dude, we're like,
well, sometimes we say it ironically a little bit too. Like there is that kind of colloquial.
I think she knows she's yeah,
and there is a colloquial use of that. But I mean, Andrea saying it about you is so different than me. If I was like, I am the parenting guru, you'd be like, yo, do not listen to that girl. Like,
run away. Oh, that is so funny. Oh my God, we have come full circle. We're like going in circles. It's like very, I'm trying to think of what's so, anyway, cylindrical.
NASCAR.
Ouroboros. Are we eating our own tail?
Yeah,
spiral staircase. Because we're progressing.
We're transcending. I feel like we're going, circles up. We're transcending together. Okay, all good things come to maybe not an end, maybe it's a pause, because Jenn, I would love to get you back on our show. I hope to meet you in person one day. You're amazing.
Likewise.
This has just been one of my favorite discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I appreciate the non-traditional questions that you're asking. This whole dialogue has been very non-traditional.
Okay, good. We're hitting some boxes. I wanted to come back to you and ask about the greenhouse method. I know you have a course available, and you've got so much wisdom and so much value, whether it's, a leader in an organization. I've often thought of your Tango as a team of leaders, right? One person, you were talking about Deanna, one of our more junior team members. Holy smokes, she's in charge of like a ton of stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. I feel like to think of yourself and to create those flatter, like you said, less hierarchical organizations where there can be so much leadership, so much initiative and ownership. And to me, that's what leadership is. So I just want to give a shout out to the course that you have available. Where can people find that, and any other color on who should be taking the Greenhouse Method course?
Yeah, thank you. So you can come on my site, just jennlim.com. It's built off, like you asked me about the greenhouse model earlier. So that was like the whole, the premise of it. Then it goes deeper into the how. I'm really big on the how do you actually do this stuff? Like, how do you actually do life work? Well, there's more to, like, how do you become your best? Like, I want to be my best self. Like, well, how do you actually do that? So anyway, the method is basically doing more of the nuts and bolts of breaking it down into how you actually build your own greenhouse, and now you actually understand your own elements that you need to celebrate what's going well and actually acknowledge the things that need to be worked on. So yeah, I do that stuff. So that's like the new program that we've been doing since the book was launched. I do coach. I mean, we have a team that's basically here for organizational levels of change and leadership, growth and development. And I believe it's like we are all leaders of our own work life. So that's up and down across the board around the world.
I love that. I love it. Very democratizing. Okay, so Greenhouse Method, you can go to Jenn with 2 N's, lim.com, and we'll put that link in the show notes. Jenn, you're amazing. Guru or not, with or without the title, you are awesome. Thank you for being on our show and imparting so much wisdom and heart. It's been phenomenal to talk to you.
It's been a super cool time, and thanks for not calling me a shaman.
Oh, that'll be the next show. It's shaman time with Jenn Lim.
Just wait. Just wait. Things change.
Yeah, you got it. All right, Jenn, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, she's amazing. And I just think it's so funny that I accidentally called her a guru. I accidentally called her a guru. You didn't need to mention it again. I mean, that you just
you just brought it up again.
I know,
but I will say
brought it up again.
I'm so glad that the star of the show has finally arrived, and that's your cat.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Cupcake is here. Oh yeah. She is she's on fire. She gives me all my mojo.
You're late.
What can I say? I know.
She's made an appearance now. This is her second appearance. She's trying to be a regular guest on the show.
Yeah, you might be fired, Cupcake. And for anybody who can't see what's happening, go to YouTube, because Cupcake's on my lap and she doesn't make a lot of noise. Okay,
she's really
I know
cute.
we don't. Oh, thank you. Yeah, she's a sweetie. She was my little stray kitty that came and adopted us. We just had such a great discussion. Holy smokes. And we had, I mean, oh my gosh, there were so many more things to talk with her about. But I know we've got to wrap it up here. So in 15 seconds or less, Joanna, what was your best takeaway?
That psychological safety is going to sit with me because it applies to so many things. It applies to our romantic relationships, our friendships, and especially in parenting. I thought it's like a revelation, the idea of creating a safe space for employees to grow together, but also our families, and how that would change everything if we got good at it.
It really does. It is so groundbreaking. And again, theme of the show, radical and obvious. I love that. Brian, what about you? What were your actionable takeaways?
I don't know about a maybe actual takeaway, but like I was fascinated by all the almost like the trickle down effect of like being a better boss, or like of humanizing your employees, and like the you're not seeing them as numbers on a board in that like profit driven, like
treat
the
people
profit
as
will
assets.
come when you treat with
assets,
exactly assets. That's what
versus liabilities.
Yeah, exactly.
I
definitely
love that well at Your Tango, how we give each other, we have a peer award that we give each other on our staff at Your Tango. And I think that that's a way that leadership tells the employees, like, you're so valuable and you even get to decide who else is valuable. I'm not the only one that decides that.
Yeah, totally. No, it's a cool tradition that we've had for many years. I'm going to share a little quote from Tony's book. He says the happiness hypothesis says happiness doesn't come from within as much as between. And I link that back to what you're saying, Joanna, because when I think about the amazing bonds that we've developed as a team at Your Tango, like it really is between, right? And so that to me is just, it's a reframing and less about me versus we. But as Jenn said, it's like we're in service of myself and we're in service of others, right? So it's like you need the me and the we. But my other favorite from her was, again, radical and obvious, especially when she was talking about, I thought she was very polite. She didn't say, hey, Elon Musk, STFU. But, when I was asking about, insisting on going back into the office, she urged people to ask the why, right? And again, I realize in a way that's the obvious. It's like, oh, we've heard that a lot, but whether it's leadership asking people to go back to work, or Joanna, ding, 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 when you have a 13-year-old kid who's like, well, why? And you can never say because I said so, because that makes you a douchebag. Yeah. And that's the first time we've said that on the show.
And they don't trust you.
God, yeah.
Then they think you have something to hide.
Yeah, and it's just a whole rank bullshit answer. And so when I think about and Jenn and her work, we obviously didn't get to everything that she does, but when she talks about the why behind, she urges people when they think about what motivates them, just to keep asking that question again and again. And it's almost like a what's the word? Like a crucible, like a purification, right? Like if you're willing to be courageous and ask that why and not be afraid of the answer. And I think that, so back to, whether it's, again, back to work or having a kid that, it's like, well, you know what, if I'm really being honest about the answer to that why, and my answer is, oh, you can't go because it's inconvenient to me. It's like, it helps you get radically honest, which again, to me is like, that's how we transform and free ourselves.
And sometimes that's a very valid reason. And my 15-year-old is home right now, and he'll tell you sometimes, why can't I go to that party? And it's like, because your dad and I are tired and we're not going to leave the house after 10 to pick you up. Okay, at least we've been honest. It's not going to be.
That's fair.
Yeah, we're tired, dude.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
I
then
say that
the
to my
bad
kids all the
news
time.
is he can come back and say, I'll take an Uber. And then you have
at least then that's an option. I mean,
well, then it's problem solving.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than like having a logical answer and then, like you said, like getting rank pulled. Like you're like, but all of these things, I did all this stuff, I have everything ready, I have a game plan, like I should be able to do this thing.
Exactly.
And it's like, no, because
then you just have control issues.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that to me, I feel like as a very type A, AAA Aries, I've had to call myself out so many times, like, Andrea, control issues. Like, F that. Like be honest with the why. And then it's like, oh, and then, I mean, again, but it's how you liberate yourself. Like, oh, I don't want to have control issues because that then ultimately ends up me being imprisoned. So yay.
Yeah.
So good.
Alrighty.
Okay, that's our show. Thank you for listening and or watching. We would love to hear from you. You may email us at openrelationships@yourtango.com. We would be super grateful if you're digging our show to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We would be ultra grateful if you downloaded this episode. That helps us a ton. We love your comments. Like us if you can. And by the way, if you don't like it and you're like, wow, that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard, let us know because we're here to improve. We want to...
We'll take your advice.
Yeah, we'll take your advice, maybe, if it's good. Anyway, that's our show.
Either way, the comment... Either way, leaving an angry comment helps our algorithm. So leave those angry comments.
So go ahead and do it. But as long as it's nothing negative against my cat, Cupcake. All right, bye.
No, Cupcake.
Thank you.
Good day.